mysteries of creation. So here, Maya is our ignorance of evil, and sun being the knowledge of God. So salvation, according to Ravindra Tagore, will be the elimination or the removal of this Maya and seeing in clear terms. So that's a short introduction into certain ideas which Ravindra Tagore held about the creation, the world, what God, the idea about God, then Maya and the salvation. So he had a very good, comfortable childhood, because his father had been very affluent and he was born and brought up in a situation or a culture wherein there was a lot of opportunity for Rabindranath Tagore to develop. So that way we can see he was born and brought up in an aristocratic family, and that was a great advantage to him. So from younger age onwards we can see him already having lofty ideals. So Rabindranath Tagore ranks with the greatest seers, sages and devotees of India who valued man above everything else. So something which we need to pay attention to, a humanist who values man above everything else. Born and brought up as an aristocrat and lover of beauty, he became conscious of his higher mission of bringing men closer to each other. In the fulfillment of his mission, he made a unique contribution during his lifetime. With eyes fixed on the future of mankind, he explored political, social, and religious areas of human relationship. His philosophy of man is largely based on perception. In the vessel of man's affection, I taste his divine nectar. He voiced the ancient wisdom of India. With the onset of 20th century, Rabindranath Tagore's ideas turned from the praise of contemplation of beauty to that of the Lord of life. Under the influence of liberal tradition of his family and the philosophy of the Upanishads, he developed a positive view of life and love of humanity. Like his predecessors, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Swami Vivekananda, Rabindranath Tagore carried India's message of love and universal brotherhood to all parts of the world, and thus tried to bring East and West together on the pure and lofty platform of human relationship. With a humanistic resolve, he abhorred all conflicts between man and man, between nation and nation. He could easily understand the demands of the new age and warned, from now onward, any nation which takes an isolated view of its own country will run counter to the spirit of the new age and know no peace. From now onward, the anxiety that each country has for its own safety must embrace the welfare of the world. Rabindranath Tagore was deeply influenced by the humanist tradition of Buddha, and the Buddhist way of life appealed to him most. The great compassion which the founder of Buddhism entertained for his fellow being, his resolve to renounce the world of luxury for relieving mankind from suffering, roused Tagore's admiration for Buddhist philosophy. So a person who was very much influenced by Buddhistic philosophy. The Lord Buddha suggested freedom from the self, from ignorance, so that man was relieved of pain. Influenced by this, Ravindra Tagore stressed that man must come out of the shell of his individual self in order to enter into larger self of humanity. So long as he remained confined within the walls of his individuality, his selfishness, his own material longings, joys and sorrows, he could not realize the universal man. Neither could he get relief from the mystery of the world. Rabindranath Tagore said, "To live in perfect goodness is to realize one's life in the infinite." I repeat, to live in perfect goodness is to realize one's life in the infinite. This is the most comprehensive view of life which we can have by our inherent power of the moral vision of the wholeness of life. And the teaching of Buddha is to cultivate this moral power to the highest extent. Know that our field of activities is not found to the plane of our narrow self. So something very basic or very fundamental to the principles which Rabindranath Tagore held, or taking or much appreciation to the Buddhist philosophy, which suggested that the freedom from self-ignorance so that man was relieved of pain. So when we look into the philosophy of Buddha, he will say, then the four noble principles, the first one, everything is sorrow. And the reason for the sorrow is the desire of man. And there should be a way of stopping these desires, controlling these desires, and cessation of that. And he suggests the methods for that. So the desire, why that desire? The desire is due to ignorance of man. And how this, what ignorant of what? What is man ignorant of? Man is ignorant about the true nature of the phenomenal world around him. So the phenomenal world around him, it is something insufficient or passing, transient. And this aspect is forgotten, and man begins to attach to it a permanent value. And that way he gets subdued to that, or gets caught in that thought of that permanence. So those things which are impermanent is given a permanent value. That is considered to be the ignorance. And also, so much so what happens, so long as man remained confined within the walls of his individuality, his selfishness, his own material longings, joys and sorrows, he could not realize the universal man. So only when man begins to realize the true nature or the true characteristic of the phenomenal world, which is insubstantial, impermanent and transient in its nature, only then you will realize, begin to give it the right value. That is, not to get yourself attached to that, but to detach yourself and give the right perspective. Rabindranath Tagore has been aptly described as a product of composite culture. In the traditions of his family, the best of Indian culture was preserved. But at the same time, it also borrowed liberally the virtues of European culture. Early in his youth, Rabindranath Tagore was influenced by humanism of the West, especially love of freedom and the large-hearted realism or radicalism of the British people. He accepted the Western definition of humanism, that man was the dominant and ultimate reality. If there is a God, he must be interpreted in human terms. Rejecting the mere traditionalism and orthodoxy of Hinduism, Rabindranath Tagore, for the first time, adapted to the spirituality of the Western humanism. So a principle which attracted him so much, be it in that of the Buddhistic thought, that is a need to give the real or perspective or the respect for the creation or the right value to the phenomenal world, and thus to get yourself away from the narrow binds and then rise to the universal man. Here he comes or gets attracted to the humanism or humanistic ideals of the Western. So for the first time, he adapted to the spirituality of Western humanism. He felt that it was only on the basis of humanism that the wide gulf between East and West could be bridged, a synthetic culture could be evolved. His imagination was aroused, and the desire of creating a new civilization from the synthesis of East and West began very early in his life. And throughout his life, he worked for the fulfillment of this noble ideal. The most important characteristic of Eastern civilization has been that it emphasized a life in harmony with nature. The most important characteristic of Eastern civilization has been that it emphasized a life in harmony with nature. In his 12 foreign trips, Ravindra Tagore carried the humanistic message of India and the nationalism of the East for the universal brotherhood, peace and prosperity of all mankind irrespective of nationality, religion and color. So this is something which he carried in all his 12 foreign tours. Rabindranath Tagore, as a rationalist and a humanitarian in his attitude towards whole problem of East and West relationship, was disgusted by the artificial division in men on the basis of castes and creeds, and rebuked Indian for being dogmatic and superstitious. Similarly, he was pained by the materialistic basis of Western civilization. He wanted a compromise between Western science and Indian spiritualism in order to guide the human race, in order to evolve a common culture and uniform ethical standards. He was aware that the mechanical character of Occidental civilization had turned human beings into mere slaves, killed their freedom and initiative to act in a natural way, killed their freedom and initiative to act in a natural way. But he also discovered that there was an organized effort in the West toward physical and intellectual perfection. Rabindranath Tagore wanted it to come forward with its science and culture to the aid of the weak and helpless nations. Thus, could it justify itself in the eyes of the humanity? So what Rabindranath Tagore was trying, that is a good mingling of both East and West, a bridge between the two. Rabindranath Tagore wanted to realize the ideal of one world on the basis of intellectual cooperation between the East and the West. In order to provide a common platform to the men of different cultures, Tagore planned to establish an international university. The synthesis of the East and the West for their religious and cultural values, he thought, could help realizing lasting peace and happiness for mankind. The idea of such university included the thought of a conference of East and West a common fellowship of learning and a common spiritual striving for the unity of human race. Rabindranath Tagore said, being strongly impressed with the need and responsibility which every individual must realize according to his power, I have formed the nucleus of an international university in India as one of the best means of promoting mutual understanding between the East and the West. Thus, Vishwa Bharati became the center of the world culture to promote goodwill among the people of different nations and religions. The ultimate aim before Tagore was to promote international amity and understanding and fulfill the highest mission of the present age, the unification of mankind. The motto he selected for his university is Yatra Vishwam Bhavati Ekanitam, where the universe becomes a single nest. So that was the motto he selected for his international university, Vishwa Bharati, that everything merging into one single nest. So not much of difference between East and West. The human beings or the humanity to be given prime importance, and where the best of the culture, best of learning. So there is going to be a sharing between the East and West. The idea or the ideal he had with regard to the establishment of the Vishwa Bharati. So what he wanted was that the synthesis of the East and the West for their religious, cultural values, he thought could be realizing the lasting peace and happiness of mankind. What he had in vision was that what we search for is happiness, the good, the benefit of everyone or the welfare of everybody. And that had been the motivating thought of his in establishing the Vishwa Bharati University. A few weeks before his death, Rabindranath Tagore wrote, I had one time believed that the springs of civilization would issue out of the heart of Europe. But today, when I am about to quit the world, the faith has gone bankrupt altogether. Rabindranath Tagore advised all nations to take up the responsibility in future to build a new society devoid of hatred and selfishness. He was of the view that only a humanitarian approach could resolve mutual conflict. In the words of Dr. Radhakrishnan, Rabindranath Tagore puts forward a plea for mankind by advocating the ideal of a family of nations to which every member will bring his unique gift. This ideal of international unity and the national independence will break down barriers of nations and make for sweet harmony. So what Rabindranath Tagore visualized was a center for unity that will break down the walls of separation. Rabindranath Tagore's attitude towards life and its problems was that of a realist and a humanist. His views on social problems of his time were not determined by the narrow consideration of such economics, politics, or religion, but by spiritual vision. According to him, social unrest was due to a wrong attitude to life and lack of reverence for the divine in man. The materialistic attitude and too much importance to physical considerations resulted in general discontentment. It is advisable for man to live in the world, but be dedicated to the service of his fellow beings by mutual help and to use all resources in making this life worth living. reminding mankind of the truth. In Gitanjali, Ravindra Tagore said, "Here is thy footstool, and there rest thy feet, where live the poorest, the lowliest, and the lost." Here is thy footstool, and there rest thy feet, where live the poorest, the lowliest, and the lost. A man who really wanted everyone to come to the aid. That means every rich person, well or affluent persons, to come to the aid of the downtrodden. After 1887, Rabindranath Tagore felt that he could not remain cut off from the life of the nation. Social, political, and religious problems attracted the attention of the poet, who was confined to the worship of nature and beauty till then. The conditions of his time made his attitude all the more courageous. In his poem, Deserted, he mocked at child marriage. According to Rabindranath Tagore, the root cause of human misery was the narrow, sectarian, and selfish approach towards life. Those who are rich merely smile at the poor without coming forward actively to help the poor. This is true of nations as well. Patriotism devoid of considerations of humanity is nothing but selfishness on a large scale. Rabindranath Tagore, one of the greatest patriots that India produced in the 19th century, his love for his motherland was real and pure. He said, "I shall be born in India again and again, with her poverty, misery, and wretchedness. I love India best." So a person who was deeply in love with India, he said as his parting words, "I shall be born in India again and again, with all her poverty, misery, and wretchedness. I love India best." Rabindranath Tagore may be compared with another great nationalist leader, Mahatma Gandhi. Both were humanists and fought for human freedom. But a careful study shows that Rabindranath Tagore had a more cosmopolitan outlook and deeper practical concern for the well-being of all men than Gandhi. He did not approve of Gandhi's method of boycotting foreign cloth and considered it a madness to burn tons of clothes when millions shivered for the want of it. Such activities was against Rabindranath Tagore's ideas of supranationalism, was against the Rabindranath Tagore's ideas of supranationalism and an idea of common civilization for the world. Rabindranath Tagore may be described as a unique humanist because, unlike others, he was the only person who tried to raise the humanity to the level of ultimate reality. He did not succeed in what he tried to realize, but still refused to lose faith in man. In 1941, a few weeks before his death, he wrote with a heavy heart, "As I look back on the stretch of past years and see crumbling ruins of a proud civilization lying heaped up as garbage out of history, and yet I shall not commit the grievous sin of losing faith in man, accepting his present defeat as final." To mankind, his last message was the necessity of cultivating nobler qualities such as appreciating beauty and truth. His message of love and universal brotherhood His ideal of universal man and one world will continue to inspire humanity in the future. In Ravindra Tagore, we have a great person, a nationalist, a humanist, and all the more a person who tried to bridge between the East and the West. His lofty ideal of bringing together the East and West in an international university, which he named as Vishwabharati, and the motto of which was that there is no East and West but only one nest, that everywhere everyone could come there and feel the thickness or the depth of humanity. So that's what he was trying to bring about. A person who joined in the nationalist movement, but he had his own, the best friend in Mahatma Gandhi and that for Albert Einstein. He had his own view on nationalism. So too much super nationalism he was not in favor of. But there is a nationalism which he was really working for, which will bring together all people together. That is realizing the value of education, which will take away or remove the ignorance of the narrow-mindedness, and thus making the entire world into one village. That was his idea, and which he worked out. So in Rabindranath Tagore we come across the idea of, that is humanity as one unit, and not to think separately, and then to work together for the welfare of everyone.